Hello everyone, this is Professor Michaella Thornton. I hope you're doing well. So far in week one, we've had a lot of work and I know you've been working really hard. So I just want to go ahead and just talk with you briefly about week two and let you know about some key things that are coming up. So first, welcome to week two. I think a lot of you have been doing really good work. I love the level of engagement and activity that I saw on the discussion boards, and most, if not all, of your measurable goals that you put on for this course on the discussion board looked really, really good. A couple quick reminders. Please make sure you're logging into our Blackboard course on a regular basis. I do take attendance weekly. I'm able to actually log into the Blackboard course, check the retention center, and see who's logging in and who is not. And I do count attendance. So if you are absent, e.g. you're inactive in the course, I'll send you an email. So if you haven't received an email, then you're good to go. There's no problems. But if you have received an email, then you know where you stand right now with attendance. And so keep in mind that more than 2 weeks of inactive time on our Blackboard course will lead to failing the course. So I wouldn't like to see that for anybody in this course. Just make sure that you're logging in regularly and that you're doing your work. I will have grades available by this upcoming Wednesday, September 18th, for your work on the discussion boards and the online syllabus quiz, so stay tuned. And if you haven't used the Grade Center before, it's a really handy, helpful way to see where you're at in the course, so make sure that you check the Grade Center on Wednesday. This week, you're going to start by pre-writing for Essay 1, the Remembered Event essay. And for those of you that enjoy creative nonfiction or personal essays or personal narratives, really that's what the Remembered Event essay is. So I'm really excited to get you started on this essay, and I'm going to help you with that with this little mini lecture as well. So I want to make sure I shift gears for a moment and talk briefly about the reading process. So you've had a reading assignment that was given to you during week one, and it is going to be culminating this Wednesday, September 18th, with a short online readings quiz. This quiz is about, I believe, 19 questions. It's about 50 points. You do have one attempt to take it and 2-hour period in which to take it. But before you finish that, I want to just talk with you briefly about the reading process, what's really helpful to think through as you're reading in Nexus and the LB Brief. First, in terms of pre-reading, one of the things you should really do anytime before you start reading anything is just to skim the piece itself. See how long it is, see who the author is, see if you can derive meaning or get a sense of what the title is about. Really make sure that you're doing your legwork by skimming and scanning and kind of doing a little bit of that pre-reading to figure out, okay, why am I reading this piece? Really, to begin reading, you should have a goal in mind. What kind of information are you trying to learn? One thing that's really helpful in Nexus, for instance, is that there are often guiding questions in the back of each essay or each section. So look at those guiding questions. Actively monitor for meaning and comprehension and understanding. So that way you can actually ensure that you're understanding what you're reading. And make sure you're taking notes. You don't have to take notes in your book if you want to resell it. But I would definitely jot down on your, in your notebook or wherever you take notes. Maybe it's an annotation on a Microsoft Word file. Just really make sure that you are taking some kind of note of what you're reading. Otherwise, it's all too easy to read a whole bunch of chapters and then not remember what you're reading. During reading, to actively monitor your reading, make sure that you are stopping, checking in. If there are words that are confusing, that you're taking a moment to either note those or look them up, and really just make sure that you're staying alert. I would also advise not reading in bed, though I know a lot of people like doing that. Unless you have really good light and that you're able to stay awake while doing so, even the best of book will put you to sleep. So just really think about your environment. Maybe you need a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. Do something with that so that way you are alert. And also, if you have any little sticky notes, little bitty Post-its or things like that, that's a great annotation tool that doesn't destroy your book. And so if that's helpful to you, please use that. Lastly, after you're done reading during that post-reading process, I would really take a moment to just reflect on what you've read. Just jot down, what do you think the main ideas are? Why do you think the author's writing this? Who do you think the author's audience is? And why do you think your professor, me, why do you think I would be assigning this reading to you? Because it's not just for busy work. I'm really giving you reading that's hopefully helping you in this course. So really ask yourself some of those questions when you're done. And there's an excellent overview of the reading process that's located in Nexus. So make sure that you've read that. It's located in one of those chapters with 1 through 4. So the QTP method, it's a lot of letters, isn't it? Is a method that I'm going to have you guys start using next week, so week 3. And really what that stands for is I'm going to have you start generating questions, some meaningful quotations in reading passages that you want to look at and analyze. And then the TP does not stand for toilet paper, though that would be awesome. It stands for talking points. So I want you to think about what are some of the talking points you might discuss with people online? And one of the things that I'm going to start doing with our reading is I'm going to start assigning certain people in our class to help conduct some of these reading discussions, and I'll be helping you so you're not on your own. But we're going to be using this strategy in week 3, and so I just want you to be introduced to it. I want you to know what it is and what it looks like. So let's get an example out in the open. So here you see Serena Williams, tennis extraordinaire player. And I've used the QTP method. There was a recent interview of Serena in the Rolling Stone magazine. This was not an assigned reading, so don't freak out if you haven't read this. You weren't supposed to. But one of the things that's really great about this interview with Serena, it's really funny, it's edgy. The interviewer does a really good job of showing some of the frustrations and the concerns that Serena has from being this amazing, illustrious athlete to really thinking about things like she wants to become a mother and she's 31 years old, and what is she going to need to do that? Has her competitive nature and her her top edge, performance as a tennis player prevented her from that dream. So there's a lot of interesting things that are in this interview. So one of the questions I might ask if I were going to be applying the QTP method to this reading is there was a mention of another African-American tennis player. Her name is Sloane Stephens, and she beat Serena recently in a game, and they've been dubbing her the new Serena. And so my question is, if Sloane has edged out Serena, has she really done that? And is she the new Serena? And then my follow-up question to that is, if so, is it possible to best an old guard player if you're still being compared to her? In other words, if you really are the next up-and-comer kind of hot young thing in an athletic context, if you're still being compared to, the person who's the rock star, does that really mean that you're, earning your due? So those are a couple questions that I probably would raise. And then the quotation I thought that was kind of funny and interesting was that there was some furor, some upsetness about the fact that supposedly Stephens had said that Serena was her mentor. And so this is what the quote says. Stephens objected, saying no way in hell was Serena her mentor, and questioned whether Serena had dissed her on Twitter, proving the tennis tour is much more like Mean Girls with prize money. And I just thought that was funny because I don't know if we would, for other tennis players like back in the day, like John McEnroe, I'm probably messing up his name, but he would throw these disastrous tantrums, but I don't think anyone would call the guys like the mean guys. So there's kind of an interesting gendered piece that's here that's kind of fascinating, but it's also a very evocative and provocative quote, so I put that one down. And then talking points, if I were doing this online discussion board and I wanted to have talking points with my colleagues in my class, so your classmates, my talking point might be that tennis has been less segregated since Serena and her sister Venus Williams first started playing over a decade ago. So Serena's reign is firmly entrenched despite up-and-comers would also be my other argument. So even when people like Sloane Stephens come into the limelight, Serena's still a very, top-notch player. Though, for older players, it's something that can slip. So this is just an example of how you would apply this QTP method to a reading. And I will be asking you to do that in an online discussion board, so just stay tuned for that. As for research for personal essays, I want to talk about this since you're right at the first stage of pre-writing, and you're probably not yet to this stage because you're still in that pre-writing mode for Essay 1, the Remembered Event. But I do want you, as you're starting to brainstorm and think about what kinds of topics you might want to write about for this first essay, I want you to think about looking at photographs like you put for the Who I Am event. Memorabilia, so for instance, my husband often saves concert tickets, flyers, things like that. So maybe you do something similar. Family and friends, so just talking with your family and friends and finding out maybe is there a story or a moment in your life that's especially memorable. A lot of students write about some depressing things, which is fine. It's totally okay to do that. But I will say that you don't have to write about a depressing thing for this first essay. If it's really important to you to explore an injury or a death or an illness, knock yourself out. But I will say the more powerful, a little bit more interesting and engaging essays tend to look at bigger life moments that are, either bittersweet, so there's goodness and there's also some sadness mixed in, but they're not completely depressing. I just remind people a lot when they're writing personal essays to make sure they're not writing trauma porn. And I mean that in that, not to minimize anyone's feelings, but just that it's really important to make sure that you're writing something that you'd feel comfortable sharing with a larger group of people, especially in an online environment. It's very easy to become very trusting of people. There's actual research on this where people just start sharing everything about themselves online. So just make sure you feel comfortable with whatever topic you pick. Other possible sources to consult while you're doing the pre-writing process for Essay 1. If you keep a journal, look at that. Maybe you keep a blog. Look at that. Letters. I don't know if your generation writes letters anymore, but I did for a very long time. And I love looking at things like my grandparents' letters. And so maybe there's something there for those of you that have access to that bygone way of communication. And then correspondence, so that might look for a modern person, not your professor, like chat logs or emails or maybe social media messages such as Facebook status updates or comments. So look at some things that help you get a sense of maybe a topic that would be of interest for you to write about, but also think about this. You want to pick a remembered event that has a larger meaning. So really ask yourself, why am I picking this personal event to write about? So when you're pre-writing, put all the ideas down. Don't worry about picking the best one yet. Just dump it out. But when you get to that point where you're starting to sort things out, really ask yourself, is there a reason why I'm wanting to pick this event? And then think about reconstructing kind of a rough timeline of events. So that way it helps you stay focused on what event's going to make the best essay topic for this Essay 1. You want to keep in mind that you want a really short and condensed moment. It needs to be no longer than 1 to 2 days and preferably several hours. Like this needs to be something that happens in several hours. And I give an example on the discussion board of a pre-writing, and I'm going to show you that as well. So here's the pre-writing strategy, and I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the kinds of pre-writing strategies you can use. I used a program called Popplet. There's links on the discussion board if you'd like to try this for a cluster map. So here's my cluster map. You might have called them idea webs, really depending on how you do it. You don't have to use this strategy if this doesn't appeal to you. I like it because I'm a visual person, so I like seeing ideas. Plus, writing is hard, but it can be really fun. But one of the things that I think is most difficult about writing is just getting started. So I don't want to futz with having to write a million things and being overwhelmed with that. And some of you might feel similarly. So this clustering idea might be really helpful. On the right side, you'll see one idea where I talk about when I first started teaching. I was 21 years old. And then I give the example of teaching in 6th grade in a really small town called Henderson, North Carolina. It was an interesting idea, but it wasn't as interesting to me as the thing that you see on the left-hand side, where I talk about hiking a really small portion of the Appalachian Trail. And so for me, this side, the left side, where I start talking about what that was like, what had happened, some of the mistakes I made, and then even the bigger picture. Remember how I said you want a personal narrative, a personal story that does more than just talk about who you are. It should really give the reader something, tangible and helpful to hang on to, kind of a life lesson, so to speak. So this particular topic definitely has that, and that hiking one's hike as a metaphor for life, I think, is very powerful and very important. So what do those strategies actually look like and how are they explained? Your Nexus reading that you have assigned goes through this in detail, so make sure you're reading that. But the three strategies that we talk about in the chapter are brainstorming and listing. And the biggest difference between brainstorming and free writing is that brainstorming really just is, putting free word associations out there, just kind of listing it, putting it out, just, putting all your options out on the table. Free writing, on the other side, tends to be more stream of consciousness, so you're writing for a set amount of time. Back in the day when I was a girl, I would have writing teachers say, put an egg timer on and then write for 5 minutes. I'll say to you, probably a much more smartphone-enabled generation, put a timer on your Android or your iPhone or whatever kind of phone you might have and write for that amount of time, including if you get stuck, I'm stuck, or oh crap, I don't know what to say. Just keep writing. Out of those free writing examples, a lot of really interesting ideas might come out of there. And I know it sounds crazy, but trust me, set that timer, whether it's on your smartphone or on your kitchen timer, and write for 5 full minutes. It might be painful. I'm warning you now, but just try it. I think it'll be really helpful. So the big difference between brainstorming and free writing, brainstorming is more like free word association, making a list. Free writing is writing actual sentences, not caring about grammar, not caring about whether or not you're spelling things correctly. It's just dumping it all out there. Think of it as like a brain dump. And then the cluster mapping, you just saw an example that I did. And so if you're more visual like I am, feel free to use that pre-writing strategy. You will need to demonstrate that you've tried one of these pre-writing strategies on the discussion board that's due this week by Sunday, and that's due by the 22nd, before midnight, and that's Central Standard Time. And then a couple of things to keep in mind for that pre-writing tips for Essay 1. Your Nexus readings go over objective detail versus and subjective detail. And objective detail is more factual, if I can speak. It's also tends to be more emotionless. It's not going to be something that's touchy-feely. Subjective tends to be more rooted in emotion. It's more about feelings and opinions. So think about how you're going to balance these two types of detail in your first essay. Also think about the importance of sensory detail. So taste, touch, smell, sight, sound. You want to think about how you're evoking an image or a scene in your first essay. And as writer Philip Lopate talks about a lot, dilate that moment. Really make it big and wondrous, even if it was a small moment. And one way to do that is to think like a cinematographer. So think about your favorite film. Even if you hate to write, just, probably most of you have a television series you like or a movie that you thought was really amazing. Think about what that filmmaker did to make that, video come alive. That's going to be one of the things to think about in your own writing. How do you construct scenes? How do you give people a sense of space and time and when this is taking place, especially if this is an event that takes place, more than several years ago. So if this has happened a decade ago, you need to really help the reader understand where he or she is, what time it is, and what time it is in your life. So that's one way to help. And a lot of films do that with flashback. They do some creative things with timelines, so you think about that as well. And then last but not least, and this is something to worry about after you've actually written a draft, so that's not until next week when your rough draft is due on Sunday the 29th, but dwell on action. Avoid to be verbs like is, was, were, am. If you're saying, I was happy, that's kind of, it's not like the best way to say that. But if you said, overjoyed at the prospect of having tomorrow off, I was ready to take the day on, that's a little bit more descriptive. It's more situated in action. So that's something to think about too as you're writing. So I just want to conclude and say happy pre-writing for Essay 1, and I really feel confident based on your work and what I observed in the Who I Am introductory project that you did on the discussion boards, that you're really going to do a great job for the pre-writing for Essay 1. And I would even encourage you to think about reviewing your Who I Am projects as a starting place for what you might want to write about. I'll actually reopen that discussion board later this evening on Monday, September 16th. So if you'd like to revisit what you said for the Who I Am project, that might be a great starting point as a pre-writing practice for Essay 1. Otherwise, I'll see you online. Tomorrow is Tuesday, September 17th. That's my birthday, which means I will not be online. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to have a day of Zen. So I will catch you later on Wednesday the 18th, but I will not be checking email on Tuesday the 17th in honor of my birthday. So just letting you know where I'm at. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I will talk with you guys later online.